Hey, everybody, welcome in. It is so good to see so many familiar faces and some new faces. I'm so glad that you guys are here. Meredith is here. It always makes me feel good. She can help answer questions as well. She's usually here just hanging with me. I am a Beadalon design team member with Meredith, in case you guys do not know who Meredith is. She is hanging out in the chat here today. All right, guys. So today we're doing the fundamentals of wire. I'm going to be talking about the differences between our artistic wires versus the German style wires. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that because I feel like we have gone through that several times in the past, but I'm willing to answer any of your questions that you have about that. And we're going to talk about 4 of the main gauges of wire that I keep in both the artistic wire and the German style wire. And I'm going to be talking about the simple wire techniques that are going to be your building blocks for all of your wire designs in the future. So we're going to be looking at simple loops, wrapped loops. We're looking at knotted head pins, which is one of my very favorites. Some creating shapes, ear wires, simple things like that that are going to help propel you into the future. It is a new year. This is a new skill for some of you, so I'm hoping to help build your confidence with the wire. We're going to go ahead and turn around and get started. There is going to be some discrepancies with the packaging. We'll talk about that here in just a second. I'm going to turn you around right now. So everything has changed a little bit here. I got to figure out how. There it is. All right. All right, let's get right into it, shall we? So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the artistic wires. Now, artistic wires are your dead soft wires. These are the wires that are the most bendable. They're easy to turn into whatever shapes you want them to be. They are most often used for creating decorations, swirls and twirls, and all of those things. This is a dead soft wire, so it's very malleable, easy to work with. And it is one of my favorites. I have this on hand all of the time. I either grab for this or I grab for the German style wire. And I have this in 4 of the main gauges that I keep on hand. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not a ton more to choose from, because there are. This comes in several different gauges. It also comes in a lot of different colors. Now, all I have today is the silver plated to show you, but there is a wide variety, a rainbow of colors that are available in the artistic wire. Now, I have, as I mentioned, 4 different gauges here. So what you're seeing, this is going to be the packaging that most of you guys are going to be seeing. I do have some different packaging, so just kind of ignore it. This is what you're going to be seeing. Some of mine is open, some of it is in a different configuration, but this is what we're talking about here. So I have some 20 gauge here. I have an open one, and you can see I use it quite often, so there's not a lot of that. I have some 24 gauge. I have 18 gauge, and I have some 22 gauge here to talk about. So oddly enough, all of the things that I do with each one of these gauges is kind of interchangeable with the German style wire. However, the German style wire is a medium temper wire. So in other words, everything that I do with my artistic soft wire here, my dead soft wire, I can do with the German style wire, but the German style wire is just a little bit harder. And I don't mean harder as in skill wise. I mean that the temper is a medium temper, so it is not as flexible. So I just kind of want to go over these at the same time, if you guys are okay with that, since we can kind of do the same things with all of them. So let's start with the largest and go and work our way downwards, shall we? So here's my 18 gauge artistic wire, and then I have my 18 gauge German style wire. All right, now the main difference is exactly what I told you. The German style wire is a medium temper wire, which means that it has a little bit more structure to it. This is not going to need nearly as much work hardening as excuse me, as your artistic wire is going to need, but you're going to be able to get the same results I think the main difference for me, and one of the main things that I talk about the most when it comes to the differences between the two, is that the German style wire is specifically designed for wire wrapping. This is specifically designed for things like your wrapped loops, for your wire weaving, things like that. The 18 gauge is what I use the most for creating components. So if I'm going to be creating wire shapes or some sort of structure, any kind of armature, 18 gauge is usually what I go for. Anything thicker than this is a little bit harder on my hands, so 18 is usually what I stick to when I'm working with jewelry. When I'm going into the craft realm, of course, I go a little bit thicker than that. But I find that the 18 gauge wire is the perfect gauge for creating earring components and pendants and things like that. And again, the German style wire is a little bit stiffer, so I don't need to work hard in it nearly as much. Now, the 18 gauge wire and artistic wire is also fantastic for creating those kinds of shapes and structures and things like that. It does take a little bit more work hardening and is a little bit easier on the fingers. This one is a lot easier if you're going to be creating spirals and swoops and swirls and things like that. You're going to find that this one is a little bit easier to work with. But if you want to create structure like the armature for a pendant or something like that, you probably want to go with the German style over the artistic wire, just for the temper of the wires. Okay, so I think I've made that's it's pretty obvious. Both of these are great. I do go for the 18 gauge the most, just because I don't have to work hard in it as much, but I have both of them on hand. And those are the things that I use these for the most. So stepping down to 20 gauge. So I have my German style 20 gauge and I have my artistic wire 20 gauge. These are both fantastic wires for creating ear wires, and it absolutely does not matter which one you want to use. When it comes to ear wires, they're both equally great. They both need to be work hardened. I'm going to show you how to do that, but the 20 gauge seems to be the sweet spot for ear wires. Now, that's not to say that you can't use the 20 gauge for other things. Lots of people either fall into one of two categories. They're either a 20 gauge person or a 22 gauge person, and they find that they gravitate towards one or the other to do literally everything with. They're simple loops, they're wrapped loops, they're knotted head pins, things like that. Most people are either all 20 gauge or all 22 gauge. I'm a 22 gauge person, but I always have 20 gauge on hand because I do reach for it for things like ear wires and rings in particular. If I'm making wire rings, 20 gauge is a really good wire for that. So either or with these when it comes to ear wires. And then of course it's going to be project specific after that. If you need something that has a little bit more rigidity to it, you're going to want to go with the 20 gauge in the German style. If you need something a little bit softer, if you're going to be creating some wonderful like wraps and swirls and things like that, this artistic wire is probably going to do a little bit better, because this is still a thicker gauge wire, but is soft enough in the artistic wire form to create some wonderful designs. When it comes to ear wires, though, the 20 gauge is the closest to what the industry standard is. The industry standard for head pins, eye pins, and ear wires. And when I say that, what I mean is like the prefab, just generic, right? You can get what you want specifically gauge wise, but if you just go to the store, box store, and you just pick up something, right, chances are it's going to be a 21 gauge. That 21 gauge is that sweet spot in between the 20 and the 22. And so that means that most ear wires that are on pre-made earrings that you buy, you know, at a department store, the ear wire size on those is going to be 21 gauge. So the 20 is really good for anything that you're going to hand make yourself. Anything thicker than this, you're probably going to find is going to be uncomfortable to wear. So 20 gauge is perfect for that. All right, now stepping down to the 22 gauge. This is my go-to for everything. And I saw Meredith was in the comments. She said she's a 22 gauge person too. 22 is the one that I use for literally everything. And for me, I'm a German style wire person. And I find that because of the German style wire, my wrapped loops are cleaner. My simple loops look neater. The German style wire has just the right amount of temper to it to make all the difference in the world. You can do the same things with either one of these, right? But this one, the German style one, is specifically designed for your wire wrap. It even says it on the packaging, ideal for wire wrapping. This is exactly what you need for wire wrapping. And I have found that 9 times out of 10, when people are struggling with their wrapped loops, it's because they're using the artistic wire. And if they switch over to the German style wire, all of a sudden they have a light bulb moment. Something happens, and it's because of the structure of this wire. All of a sudden their loops look fantastic. So if you find that you're kind of struggling with your wrapped loops, they don't always look clean, they're kind of wonky, and you've been using artistic wire, that's great. That's fantastic. But it might be making the change to the German style wire that changes the game for you. I use this for wire wrapping onto other things. So if I'm going to be wire wrapping onto 18 gauge wire, I use the 22 gauge. If I'm going to make knotted head pins, I use the 22 gauge. This is, again, my go-to. If I'm going to make a wire, a beaded chain with my own wrapped loops, the 22 gauge is what I go for. The same thing is true when it comes to creating well, when it comes to either you're a 20 gauge or a 22 gauge person, you can do literally the same things with either one of these. So I don't want you to think that 22 gauge wire and artistic wire is not great. It absolutely is. And when I say you're either in one camp or the other, if you're a 20 gauge or a 22 gauge, that's also true when it comes to you're either an all German style person or an all artistic wire person. So if your wraps loops are already fantastic with the artistic wire, you don't necessarily need to switch over. Okay, I'm just saying if you struggle, making the change might help. But if you already have wonderful success with the artistic wire, don't change what you're doing, right? If it's not broken, don't fix it. Both are fantastic. You don't have to work hard in the 22 nearly as much. And it is the one that I grab for when I'm doing wrapped loops. And we're going to do that here in just a little bit. All right, now the smallest that I have on my list of have to have gauges is the 24 gauge. And I have it both in the artistic wire and the German style wire. And again, it's either or because they're both fantastic. Again, the German style wire has the medium temper, so it's a little bit stiffer when you are working with it, but they're both ideal for wire wrapping onto other things. These are also the perfect gauge for your smaller drilled beads. So if we're talking about some of your smaller seed beads, 11 or smaller, if we're talking about pearls, because a lot of times your freshwater pearls have a smaller drill hole, this is a great wire choice for that. Some of your gemstone beads that have a smaller drill hole, the 24 gauge is going to fit most of those. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get a smaller gauge wire. You absolutely can, but the 24 gauge is the one that I grab for the most when it comes to smaller gauges. I have this on hand in both the artistic and the German style, and I keep them around for whatever the situation is, because sometimes I need the medium temper, sometimes I just need the soft, but I do find that these are ideal for wrapping onto other things. So if you are wire wrapping beads onto a pre-made component, or if you are going to be wire wrapping and making a beaded chain out of things that have a small drill hole, 24 gauge, that's the way to go for sure. All right, now I'm going to move on because I do want us to actually do some things here. So if you've got other questions about wire, feel free to ask those as we go along, but we're going to look at simple loops. And then we're going to look at our wrapped loops. And I'm going to do kind of a very slow tutorial for both of those. So I'm going to grab some of my 22 gauge wire here, and I'm going to be using the German style because that's the one that I go for the most. But if you like the 20 and you like the artistic instead, that's wonderful. All right, so actually, you know what? Let's do 20 gauge for a simple loop. Let's see here. Let's grab this one. All right, so simple loops and wrapped loops are your main connections, at least in the beginning. Those are some of your very main connections that you're going to start making when you are beginning with wire. And you will continue to use those in a lot of different ways, but the most simple of the two are the wrapped and the simple loop. So simple loop, you're just going to cut yourself a length of wire depending on what your needs are. I have several inches here that I've cut, and I'm using my flush cutter. My flush cutter is my very favorite cutter tool for all of my wire work because I can get 2 different cuts out of this. The flush cut, obviously, if you cut on the side that is nice and flat, you're going to get a flush cut. If you cut with the other side, you're going to get that pointy tip here. See if you can see it. So you can see this is not a flush cut. See how that comes up to a point, right? However, if you're going to cut your wire with the flat side, I'll do the other end so we can compare the two. You're going to get a nice flush cut, right? Exactly what the name says. So perfect for anytime you need your wires to meet up and be smooth up against each other. That flush cut is perfect for that. And then your other scenarios where you can get that point right there. Okay, so for creating a simple loop, I'm going to use my stepped bell making pliers. This is one of my go-to tools because I can create a lot of different things with this. I can create wrapped loops, simple loops. I can create jump rings with this, bails. I can create all kinds of things with this one, and I can get 6 different sizes out of this. So this is a really nice thing to have on hand. But we're going to do just a simple loop. So let's start there. I'm going to start using not the smallest mandrel, but the next one up. I'm going to take the wire that I have cut, and I'm going to hold it right at the end between the pliers, and then I'm going to roll the end to create a P shape out of my wire. Okay. Now, when you see a prefab eye pin, they don't look like this, right? The wire, the long portion, the stem of the wire is centered up. So we can very easily do that ourselves by putting this back onto the tool. And then we are going to, this is a terrible term, but this is what it's called. We're going to break the neck. So we're just going to very gently turn the wire to center up our loop on the top of that wire. And then once we have this taken care of, now we have a loop connection that we can use to open and close. We're going to treat this like a jump ring. So we're going to use our chain nose pliers. We can twist to open this and hook this onto something, or hook a jump ring onto it, hook a charm to it. And then you are going to twist to close that back, and you have it closed again. Right. So this is probably the #1 thing that most people learn in the beginning to start their wire journey. So I had somebody in the comments ask about the tool. This is the stepped bell making pliers, and you can see it's got 6 different sizes here. So we have large all the way down to very, very small. So you can get 6 different sizes of loops here, whether you're making simple loops or jump rings, or you're making some other kind of wire component, you can get 6 different sizes here. All right, so let's do that one more time. Let's do it over here on the other end. So I'm going to cut this end nice and flush, and then we are going to grab the wire right at the tip. Again, I'm using not the smallest, but the next size up, but you can use any of the 6 that are here to create whatever size loop you want. You're just going to roll the end, right? And now you have created your little P shape, but we want to center that up. So we're going to put this back onto the tool, and then we're just going to give it a very slight little bend. See how I just kind of tilt the pliers in my hands, and that's going to help to center up your loop. And then you have a loop that you can connect to whatever you need to, just by twisting to open and then twisting close. You don't ever want to pull this apart because you'll never get that closure. Again, it won't be nice and round. It'll look really bad. So always want to twist to open and then twist to close, right? And you can see you can easily create that on either end of the wire for whatever you want. We could have filled this up with beads and, you know, created a dangle out of this or a link for something. All right, so that's step one. Step two is going to be creating the same loop, but with wraps. Okay, so to do that, the steps are a little bit more. All right, so I'm gonna have to do a couple of different things here. Now I've switched down to my 22 gauge wire for this. I was using the 20 for my simple loops. I'm gonna do 22 gauge for my wrapped loops. There's a few more steps involved here. So the first thing that we're going to do is when we have cut our wire, we need to come down from the top of the wire about 1.5 inches or 1 inch, somewhere around there, whatever you're comfortable with. I usually try to go for about 1.5 inches so that I have enough wire to make a loop and about 3 wraps. I'm grabbing that wire with my chain nose pliers and I'm holding it so that the wire is running up and down. Okay, I'm going to take the wire and I'm going to bend the wire over the top of the pliers, just like so. So what I have created here is like a backward 7. Okay, putting down my chain nose pliers, I'm going to come in with my round nose pliers. Now you can use the stepped bell making pliers for this, but I'm going to use my round nose pliers. That's what I use most often. I'm going to grab the wire so that that top of my 7 is running through this direction, right? I've still got this wire going up and down, and this one is now going from left to right. Okay, I'm going to take that wire and I'm going to go up and over the top barrel of the round nose pliers. So you can see I'm holding the round nose pliers so that the barrels are on top of each other. So when I go up and over that, now I have created this really interestingly strange shape. I don't even know what you want to call that, but it doesn't look like much at the moment, and it's certainly not a loop. In order to take the wire over here to the other side to close up this loop, I need to move the barrel of the pliers. The bottom barrel is in the way. So in order to get the bottom barrel out of the way, I am going to rotate the pliers in my hands. Now, I didn't take the wire off of the tool. All I did was just rotate the pliers. I made the bottom barrel, now the top barrel. So now I can take the wire over to the other side, like so, and I have my loop, right? I'm going to switch hands. And now this short section of wire that is now running out this direction, I'm going to use it to wrap around the straight section of wire about 3 times. So there's 1, there's 2, and 3. Okay. So now when I take this off of the tool, I have a loop, but I have wire wraps underneath it. I'm going to use my cutter tool to come in and trim off the excess. And now I have a nice clean wrapped loop. Now this loop, because it is wire wrapped, I cannot open this one. I can't open it, I can't close it. So anything that I attach to this is going to need to be something that I either wire wrap directly to this, or a jump ring that I can open and close, or a simple loop that I can open and close. So for instance, I can take my simple loop, open that up, I can attach it, and then I can close this back, right? So that I have these two connected to each other, but I can't open the wrapped one once I have created the wraps. That doesn't mean that you can't wire wrap things to it beforehand. So if you wanted to slip a bead on, slip a jump ring on before you do the wraps, you can do that. We're going to talk about all of that as we go through. But in the meantime, let's do one more wrapped loop so we get some good practice on that. Okay. All right. So again, coming down about 1.5 inches from the top of the wire with my chain nose pliers. Let me raise you guys up just a little bit so I can get my tools underneath here a little bit better. All right, so again, chain nose pliers, holding that wire about 1.5 inches from the end, and I'm going to bend the wire 90 degrees. Okay, Now I'm going to come in with my round nose pliers, grab the wire. I'm going to take the wire up and over the top barrel of the pliers. Then I'm going to reposition the pliers. So I'm going from this position to this position. I'm just rotating, taking the bottom barrel, rotating it up. So now that it is on the top, so that I can take my wire over to close my loop. And then I'm going to switch hands, and I can either use my other pair of pliers or my fingers to wire wrap underneath the loop. And now I have a wrapped loop. Come in with your cutter and trim off the excess. You want to trim as close as you possibly can. And then if you still need to get in there, it's a lot easier when you don't have a bead that you're working up against, but sometimes when you are doing a wrapped loop up against a bead, it's harder to get in there with your cutter tool. So sometimes you need to come in afterwards and tuck the end of your wire with your pliers, okay? All right, so we've made it through the first two, arguably the most important things that you're going to learn in wire wrapping, because you will use these, both of these, over and over and over again. And they are situational, so it kind of depends. Sometimes it doesn't make any difference, and it's just which one you prefer over the other. But these are, like I said, pretty often used. Now, I do want to show you a quick little variation on your eye pin, because I feel like there's another scenario where you might need to make an eye pin. Well, there definitely is another scenario where you don't want to just create that P shape. And that's going to be when you thread a bead on. Let's see if I can find beads that I had here. All right, so I've got this pretty strand of bead landing beads. Some really pretty check glass here. So I'm going to take a bead and I'm going to show you. So I'm going to thread one of these beads on, right? Now, when you have a bead, you cannot just come in with your bail making pliers and just create that loop, right? Like I showed you to begin with. So we kind of have to improvise. So we're going to create our loop up against the bead. So I'm going to grab the bead, I'm going to hold on to it, and I'm going to take the wire and I'm going to bend it where it is exiting the bead, right? So I'm bending it right as it is coming out of the end of the, right out of the drill hole of that bead. Now, something that you may have noticed is the way that I did that. I'm going to do it again. I use the chomp chomp method for this. And it is basically where, instead of just doing this in one smooth motion, I use these little micro motions to kind of chomp, chomp, chomp down with my pliers to bend that wire. That way I don't have to put a lot of pressure on myself. It doesn't look perfect because I can't do it in just one smooth motion. No, use whatever it takes to get to this point, right? I can show it to you again here in a minute. But now, to create your simple loop, what you're going to do is you are going to use your finger and you are going to measure against your finger. You need about 1/4 of an inch of wire. Now, everybody's fingers are going to be a little bit different size, right? Everybody's fingers are a different width. Just kind of pick a place on your finger that is about 1/4 of an inch. The first few times that you do this, you may need to bring in a ruler to kind of measure, but I kind of have memorized on my finger where that 1/4 of an inch is. You're going to trim. Okay, so I've cut off the wire. I have just enough to make a simple loop. Now I'm going to come in with my round nose pliers. This is another scenario where I cannot do this in one smooth motion, and I don't want you to feel like you need to either. So I do a rocking motion and I reposition my pliers to get the loop that I want. If I'm using my round nose pliers, you can also do this with your bail making pliers. Okay. So I'm going to grab the tip of that wire and then I'm going to roll back, and see how I'm rocking. I'm doing this in a couple of different little motions to create my closed loop, right? I didn't do it in one smooth motion. I can't. I'm just not, I'm not good enough to do that. If you can, that's fantastic. I've been doing this for years and I still have not perfected it. So I use the rocking motion, and honestly, it works for me. That's what's going to work for some of you. Then that's the way you need to do it. There's no right or wrong with this. Whatever gets you to this point is what I want you to do. Okay. So let's do that one more time. And then we're gonna, let's see, let's not trim that one off because I need to use that one here in a second. Let's do another, we'll do one of each again. So let's do the one where we're not working up against a bead. So we're grabbing the wire, we're just gonna roll. And then slight bend to even up our wire, okay? And then we're gonna add a bead, right? So now we need another loop here. I'm gonna grab the wire right where it is exiting the bead. And this is the chomp chomp method, right? So you can see I'm holding the bead stationary, and then I'm kind of opening and closing my pliers in like little tiny movements to bend that wire, okay? And again, coming in with my cutter to trim, leaving myself about 1/4 of an inch of wire. And then I'm going to use either my bell making pliers, or my round nose pliers, grab the wire, and then I'm going to roll back, but I'm kind of rocking motion to do that, right? To get my simple loop. Okay. All right, so that's how you're going to create a simple loop up against a bead. Now let's do a wrapped loop up against a bead, shall we? Because this is also going to take a different set of steps, right? So we've done our wrapped loop on one end. We're going to thread our bead on. Okay, now we are going to do a wrapped loop. In order to do a wrapped loop, we don't need to bend the wire right where it is exiting the bead because we need room for the wire wraps. In order to get the right amount of room, I don't want to come in here with my my ruler every single time. That is a pain. It takes time. It's not worth it. So I let the pliers do the work for me. So I have my chain nose pliers. I'm going to grab the wire right where it is exiting the bead, but then I'm going to bend the wire over the top of the pliers instead of right where it exits the bead. So now when I take my pliers away, I already have the right amount of room for my wire wraps. You can see there's some space here between the top of the bead and the bend. That's the perfect amount of space for my wire wraps. So now coming in with my round nose pliers, okay, I'm going up and over. The steps for this part are the same. Now, can't take the wire over because the bottom barrel is in the way. So same thing, I'm going to rotate the pliers in my hand. So I made the bottom barrel, now the top barrel. Now I can take the wire over to the other side, and look at that. I've got enough room in between the loop and the bead to create those wire wraps. So I'm going to use my pliers here, and I'm going to wrap. And now I have a wrapped loop on both sides of my bead. There's no wiggle room here. It's nice and secure. I'm going to come in with my cutter, and I'm going to trim off. And again, if you can't get in there super close with your cutter tool, then you may need to come in with your pliers and kind of tuck your end in. But there you go. You've got a wrapped loop on both sides. So you can see creating a wrapped loop or a simple loop without a bead is one set of steps, right? But then when you start to add things that you need to do your loops up against, kind of changes the game just a little bit. The steps are overall the same, but in the beginning, bending either over the pliers or right where you're exiting the bead is the difference there. So just keep that in mind. Your wrapped loop needs room for the wraps, whereas your simple loop does not. All right. Okay, so now we've learned those wonderful skills. Let's move on to creating a head pin, because I've shown you essentially how to create your own eye pins, right? Because if you can do a wrapped loop or a simple loop at the end of wire, you have created yourself an eye pin. Now I want to show you how you can create your own head pin. Now this involves a pair of nylon jaw pliers. You got to have these in order to create a knotted head pin. These are super important. You don't want to do this without these, trust me. Okay, so to create a knotted head pin, you're going to take a piece of wire, okay, however long you need it to be, depending on what it is that you're going to be creating. I'm using 22. You can use 20. You can use 24 gauge. It's going to be project specific. Remember, the thicker the wire, the bigger the knot is going to be. So keep that in mind, because sometimes you need a knotted head pin, but you don't want it to be overpowering to your bead. For instance, if I were using one of these little 4mm beads, I probably wouldn't use my 22 gauge. I'd probably go for the 24 gauge, just because the knot, I don't want it to be overpowering in relation to my bead. Okay. Okay. So what you're going to do is you are going to take your round nose pliers. You're going to grab the tip of the wire at the very tip of the pliers. And guys, it needs to be your round nose pliers for this, okay? Tip the pliers, tip of the wire. You're going to roll the wire around the tip of the pliers all the way around once. You can see, I can see the cut end of the wire, so that lets me know I've gone all the way around once. Then I'm going to go all the way around again a second time underneath that first wrap around, and then you're going to stop. So you've wrapped around, you've essentially created a coil around the tip of your pliers 2 times. Okay. Now, don't take this off of the pliers yet. Holding this in your hand so that the pliers are running from left to right, and the wire is coming down. You're going to take the wire and you are going to bend it underneath the coil, running in the opposite direction of your hands and the pliers themselves. Okay, so you're going in the opposite direction. This is a lot of times where people mess this up. So you don't want to bend the wire back towards your hand or the handles of your pliers. You want to go in the opposite direction. Okay, you're going to take this off of the tool. Right? So this is what you've got. It's kind of strange looking at the moment. You're going to take the tail end of your wire and you're going to bend it backwards, and you are going to stick it through those 2 little coils that you made. Okay. Then you're going to come in with your nylon jaw pliers and you're going to grab the wire right next to those 2 coils. Now you're going to take another pair of pliers. I like to use my bent chain nose pliers for this, but you use whatever works for you. You're going to grab the tail end of this wire and you're going to pull. And as you pull a knot into the end of your wire. It looks like a little rosette, it's like a little flower. You've pulled this through these nylon jaws. If you do this with regular pliers, you will strip the wire to shreds. Don't do it. Nylon jaw pliers only. When you take this off, you've got yourself a little head pin, right? And it is centered. So it's not off to one side, it is centered up. You've made yourself a little head pin. You can thread your bead on, and it's going to sit right on top of your little knot. Right? And then you can do a wrapped loop, simple loop, whatever you want to do. Okay, you want to do another one? Let's do one more. And then we're going to talk about making shapes. All right, so, okay, cutting a length of the wire. And we are going to use our round nose pliers, tip of the round nose pliers, tip of the wire. We're going to roll that wire around the tip of the pliers once, all the way around, and then we're going to go a second time all the way around. And then we're going to stop, bend the wire so that it is going in the opposite direction of your hand and the pliers. Okay, so it's actually underneath those 2 coils. Take that off. Take the end of your wire and bend it backwards to go through, whoops, the 2 coils that you made. Looks like a little lasso. Okay. You're going to come in with your nylon jaw pliers, grab the wire right up against those 2 coils, and then you're going to use your other pliers to pull. Whoops. Okay, and you have pulled a little knot into the end of your wire that you can now use as a head pin. So now you can make head pins on your own. You can make eye pins on your own. You are well on your way to doing just about anything you want to learn how to do with wire now. You've got your basics. These are essential for everything. From whatever you do from this point forward, you're always going to fall back on these. So I definitely recommend practicing everything we've done up until this point as many times as you possibly can. Like whatever you need to do to practice them, sit while you're watching TV or, you know, watching your favorite Netflix show and just practice these. If you have wire scraps, it's a great use of your wire scraps to practice all of these skills. Okay, so once we've gotten this far, now we can start to kind of look at some other things that we can create with wire, right? We want to be able to create loops and hoops and things like that to create pendants, to create ear wires or earring components. One of my very favorite tools for that is this guy right here. This is my artistic wire mandrel tool. I reach for this for literally everything. This is such an inexpensive tool, but is so underrated because this guy can create so many different things. First of all, it's just a handle, right? And it's interchangeable. So it comes with all of the parts that you need here. So this one is circles, right? I can attach that very easily. I don't have to use any tools for this. I just pop it right on there and I can create a hoop or a circle in all of these different sizes. This is great for whatever kind of components you want to use. If you need an extra big one, you can use the handle instead. You can switch it out. This one is an oval. This one is great for creating oval shapes. I love this one for creating beautiful feminine drops. So cool, right? Then there is this one that is squares. And then last but not least, we have the triangles. Okay, and they all come together, by the way. You don't have to buy them individually. They all come in one pack. Super cool. These are super easy to work with. You can create components. You can create jump rings, whatever you want to create with these. So let me show you how I do this. So I put the round one back on and I'm going to reach for my 18 gauge wire because the 18 gauge, if you'll remember, is the one that I use for creating components. So I'm going to take a little bit of my 18 gauge wire here, find the end. I guess I could just cut this off. I was trying to keep, there it is. Trying to keep it from being a big disaster. Okay, so I'm going to take a section of my 18 gauge wire, trim. All right, now I'm going to place this onto the mandrel tool wherever it is that I want to use, or for whatever size I want, right? We're gonna go right in here. Take my wire, I'm placing it right up against the mandrel and I'm holding that down with my thumb. Okay, then I'm going to take the rest of the wire and I'm just going to guide it around. Super easy, right? Guiding that around to the other side. And look, I have a round shape. Now that's all well and good. I didn't finish off the ends, but I just wanted to show you, like, that's how easy it is to create the shape that you want, right? Now you can put it back on the tool or don't take it off at all. I was just kind of showing you, but putting it back onto the tool, you can do any number of things here at this point, but I like to do a wrapped loop. So I will usually take one of my ends of the wire right where they're crisscrossing each other, and I'll bend one of them straight up and down, just like that. It's not the cleanest in the world. But it's totally fine. And then I'm going to take the round section or the short section that's going off this direction, and I'm just going to wrap around that straight section of wire. Keep that off. And now I have a closed hoop. Now, this one was not the most perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but you understand, right? it's that simple to create a component using the loops or the circles. I always call them loops. Using the circles, the triangles, the ovals, makes absolutely no difference. The steps are going to be pretty much the same. You can also get teardrop shapes here. So if you wanted to, for instance, let me show you a quick teardrop. So I'm going to take my wire, trim it down just a little bit. So for this one, obviously you can drop a bead down on it, do a simple loop, wrapped loop, whatever you want to do, cut off, or you can use your bell making pliers here. Let's do a loop on each end of our cut piece of wire. So there's a loop on that. I'm not going to straighten them up. I'm going to leave them just like they are. Okay. So I've done a simple loop on either end. And then I'm just going to use this as my guide, right? And you can adjust. Look, and now I have this teardrop shape, right? That I can flip those loops around. I can add jump rings to these. I can connect another bead here with a series of jump rings. I can wire wrap to it. You can do all those things with this as well. But this one is not closed, right? So this one I use simple loops instead of a wrapped loop to finish off my ends, and now I can attach other things to it. So you can do that with any of these at all. Once you have the shape that you want, you're going to want to work harden this. So we're going to bring in our block. You're going to need a steel block. You're going to need a nylon hammer, right? And to work harden your wire, whether it is one of these, one of those, anything, an ear wire, what have you, you place it onto the steel and then you use your nylon hammer and you're going to take this out, tapping all along the surface of the wire. The nylon hammer is not going to flatten this wire. Okay, so if you're looking to flatten the wire, you're going to need a metal chasing hammer or something like that. The nylon, all this is going to do is work harden this. It's going to stiffen the wire up even more than it already is, so that now you have some extra insurance that you're going to keep the shape that you created, and it's not going to bend out of that shape. I like to do both sides. And then I just test it to see if it's as strong as I want it. And if it's not, then I'll put it back on and I will work harden it some more. Now there's a science behind this. There's like an actual scientific reason that this happens. I don't know what that is. All I know is that anytime you mix your steel and your nylon, you're going to get a work hardened piece here. Now, there are other ways to work harden, but this for me is obviously the easiest and the quickest way to do that, particularly when it's a component that I can lay flat. A component that has wraps on it like this one, I set the wraps off to the side because otherwise it's not going to lay flat. So I'll put the wraps off to the side and then work harden that way, right? All right, so gosh, we're cramming a lot here into our class period here. I feel like I could continue to go on and give you some more information about creating shapes and components, but we are just going to stick with the basics here. And I did promise to show you how to make an ear wire. So that's what we're going to finish this class off with, right? So we are going to move down to some 20 gauge wire. So I saw a question go by, do you need to work harden all wire? The answer to that is no. And it's actually going to be dependent on what it is that you are creating, right? If you are creating something like this, where this structure needs to remain the same, whether you're going to use this as an earring or a pendant, and it might be knocking up against something, or your hair might get caught around it, or whatever the situation is when you go to take your hair off of it, or if you're going to wire wrap beads to it, you want this shape to be maintained. You don't want to lose this shape, right? So you work harden it to make sure that you have that shape stays the same. However, when you're doing like wrapped loops like these, smaller work, you're actually work hardening this wire as you are using it. The more you bend and twist and wrap the wire or make little loops with it, it's hardening itself, right? The more you move the wire, the harder it's going to become. So in that instance, you do not need to work harden things like this that are small. Don't feel like every loop you ever make, you're going to need to put that on the board. You don't need to do that. Trust me, it's already doing it for you. So your bigger components, yes, you definitely want to work harden them a little bit, but your smaller things, I don't think that it's necessary because chances are you've probably already moved that wire around. Now, if I were going to just leave this like this is, right? For instance, I wanted the wire to be part of this design and I wanted to come up here and I didn't want to do my wrapped loop right up against the bead for whatever reason. I want this to actually be the design. It's a long piece of wire with a bead on the bottom. If you were going to do that, right? Then this small section of wire here that is exposed, if you will, right? This little exposed section of wire, you probably do want to work harden that, right? Just because you don't want it to bend out of shape. You want that to be, but you want it to be just like it is. So yes, work hardening in this situation is definitely going to be important. Okay, let's finish off with an ear wire, and then I will leave you guys to go and practice all of your wire working skills. I'm going to use some 20 gauge artistic wire, and it doesn't take a lot. Trim a little bit of this, okay? And I'm going to create my very favorite ear wire, the most simple and the most comfortable ear wire that I use when I'm creating my own. And I can create a lot of different styles, but this is my go-to. So I'm going to either use the smallest or the next step up. It's usually situational. I'm going to use the smallest in this instance to make a loop on the end, just like what we did when we started. So I'm going to roll the wire to create my loop. Now I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to straighten it up. I'm not going to break the neck and center up the wire. I'm going to leave it just like it is. Then I'm going to come back to my my stepped pliers here, and I'm going to use the largest section of this to create my ear wire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this into the pliers back here at the back. Okay, you can see I've got my little loop. It's right up against the tool. It's literally sitting right up against it. Okay, I'm going to take my wire and I'm going to guide it around the largest part of this tool. So the largest mandrel. And I'm going to take this off. Okay, does not look like anything right now, right? It just looks like some sort of weird little hook. I'm going to come in with my flush cutter and I'm going to place it so that that loop, the small loop, is sitting right up against the edge. This way, every time I make one of these, I don't have to pre-measure. I know that I'm cutting in the same place every single time. Okay. So that loop sits right up against the edge, cut. Okay. Again, doesn't look like much at the moment. I'm going to come in with my chain nose pliers. I'm going to grab the very tip of that wire and I'm going to give it a bend, just a little slight bend. And then I'm also going to open this up with my fingers. And this is a incredibly comfortable ear wire. Now we're not done with this. There's a couple things that we have to do, but the shape, super comfortable, very, very, very comfortable. We have a loop here that we can open and close to attach things to. So I can attach this to whatever I want, right? I can attach my bead here if I want to, whatever it is. Okay. Two more things that have to happen at this point. First thing that needs to happen is we need to work harden this. So I'm going to put it on the block and we're going to work harden. We're going to do both sides. Okay. And take that off. Now it looks to be finished, right? You would think this is done. This is not done. This is not done. There is one more step that is arguably the most important step to this entire process, and that is sanding off the end of this wire. If you take this at this point and you put it on your earring, put whatever, and then you give this to somebody, or you sell this to your customer, or you put this on yourself, you are setting yourself up for an infection, because at the very tip of this wire, there can be little jagged pieces of that wire. Even with your flush cutter, there can be little jagged particles that are still there, microscopic, that can cause real problems in your piercing. So what we do is we file off the end of this. You can use an emery board, you can use a metal file, or you can use my very favorite thing, and that is my wire rounder tip that goes into my bead reamer. So I have the bead reamer here. You use this, right? You put the batteries in it and you use this to ream out like your pearls or your gemstone beads that there may be some reason that you need to ream that out, right? You can take this off, take your file end off of that, and get this little guy right here. It's got a little cup right on the end of it. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but that little cup has little grooves all inside there. You're going to place that down into the little holder, put that down into your wire rounder, and now it's going to spin around for you when you push the button. It's going to round off the tip of that wire, so you don't have to worry about all those little tiny shards. So I'm going to put that right in there. I'm going to push the button, and then I'm going to wiggle that around, and it is going to file down. See how it smooths the end of that? Now I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry that I am causing anybody any harm at all. Right? And now you're done. Now you can be finished. Don't skip that step. Don't skip that step. If you learned anything from me today, let it be that. Don't skip that step, because you don't want to be the person who sold a bunch of earrings to people who all come back and say, I have an infection in my piercing. What have you done to me? You don't want to be that person. Trust me. So save yourself the trouble, and be sure that however you do it, even if you just do it with an emery board, that you file off the end of that wire, so that you do not have any problems for yourself, for your customers, your friends, your family, whoever you're giving your jewelry to, right? Don't want to be that person. So, all right, now you can just very easily take whatever you've got, right? We've already got a bead here that's ready to go. We're just going to hook that right on there, and we could add something else because we still have this loop here on the bottom. We could attach something else. We can attach this guy where we made our knotted head pin. So let's go ahead. We'll link these two together. So we're going to go up and over, rotate the pliers, take the wire over to the other side. Now I can link this before I wire wrap. I can link this to this one by taking the tail end of this wire, sliding it through here, link those two together. Then I can come in with my bent chain nose pliers, hold on to that loop, and then I can wire wrap. And I can trim off the excess wire, and I've got myself a little dangle earring. This is also the same way that you would make like a beaded chain without any jump rings if you wanted to just wire wrap them together. Right? No jump rings involved here at all, right? We did all of that, all the way to the ear wire. Every single step of this, we did on our own, handmade start to finish, right? I mean, except for the beads, of course, but you understand. So there you go, guys. Lots of great information in today's class, guys. Don't forget, in 24 to 48 hours, you can come back and rewatch this as a replay as many times as you want to. So if you need to refresh yourself, if you need to, fast forward to get right to the technique or the step that you were missing, you can go right to that, and you can watch it as many times as you want to. All right, guys, I'm going to turn you around. And we will say our goodbyes, not forever, but just for a little while. I'll be back with you guys again soon in the very near future. Another fun project for you guys. So let me hold this one up so you can see what it looks like, right? We've got our little ear wire. This is such a comfortable ear wire. If you are a lever back or a lever back earring person, those are always my go-tos. I like them because they're the most comfortable. If you are one of those people, this, I know it's not a lever back ear wire, but it's shaped very similarly, so it fits nicely. It wears as comfortably as that. So if you're kind of particular about that, then you're going to love this ear wire. Plus, it's super easy to make. So, all right, friends, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you for joining me, letting me be a part of your afternoon. Thanks for hanging. As mentioned, I will be back with you guys again very soon with another fun project. But until then, go make some wire doodads, right? Just practice, just play, use your wire scraps, and get familiar with your wrapped loops and your simple loops. And the hard part is over, I promise. All right, guys, thanks. I will see you again soon. Bye, guys.